Hello everybody, welcome to this new video. Today I'm going to give you 11 steps with which you can bring your footage to a whole new level. 11 steps with which you can make your footage more cinematic and just all in all improve your footage and make it look way better. So let's get straight into this. Step number 1. Use camera movement. I actually made a whole video on camera movement before. You can check it out with the link in the description. But basically all I mean is look at this piece of footage. Pretty boring, right? And now look at this. That looks much better. With some camera movement you can just make footage look so much more interesting. And sometimes static shots can be very powerful, but if you don't really know when they are powerful, and I have to admit I'm not really a big fan of static shots anyway, so I very rarely use them. In my camera movements video I cover a big variety of different camera movements which you can then use in your videos, so go check it out if you haven't seen it yet and start using them and improve your video with doing that. And let's get right to the next step. So step number 2 would be to use slow motion. Sounds rather obvious because we all know slow motion is really cinematic and just looks really cool, but a lot of people either just oversee it or don't use it, maybe because they think if it's not 120 frames per second it's not good enough. But that is not true. I shoot with my Lumix GX85, also known as the Lumix GX80, and it is capable only of 50 frames per second, but I'm still really happy with the slow motion I have. So for example, if you look at this footage, and then you look at this footage, it's basically the same shot, but just in slow motion. Even if it's just half as slow, that is totally enough in my opinion. At least I think it looks really cool. So even if your camera is only capable of 50 or maybe 60 frames per second, still make good use of it. It's very advantageous. Step number 3, use stabilized footage. I just mean, like, I still see this sometimes, that footage is not really stable and yeah, it's just not cinematic. I mean, I can't really say much more than this. Just use stabilized footage. Use a glide cam, a gimbal, or a camera with in-body stabilization like I do because I can't afford a gimbal anyway. Or just use some simple little tricks like creating tension between your camera strap and yourself, because that can stabilize your footage. And in case you want more tricks like that, I'll be posting a video like that in the near future. So you'll have to wait for that. But let's get to the next tip. Tip number 4. Use the 180 shutter rule, or at least try to use it. I'm not very good at using it myself, but still, look at this footage right here. It has quite natural motion blur, but now if you look at this, I didn't use the 180 shutter rule. I was way down with my shutter speed and it looks really blurry and just looks bad. So yeah, avoid going under the double of your frame rate. Above is like alright, it'll look a little choppy, but basically just remember 180 shutter rule. Keep your shutter speed double your frame rate, and I personally think it's acceptable to go higher, but definitely not lower because it'll just look really bad. Step number 5, use a low aperture. I'm filming with f1.7 right now, that's why you can see that's a shallow depth of field. I'm in focus, the background isn't. And I personally think that looks pretty cool and cinematic, and you can use that in your videos. For example, in this piece of footage you can see it just looks nice and cinematic with that shallow depth of field. And if you only have a zoom lens, for example, which only goes down to f3.5, then try zooming in a lot, because that will increase the shallow depth of field, and by doing that it'll look more cinematic. Tip number 6, create depth by having objects in front of your lens. I mean, this shot here, for example, I am revealing the street that I'm trying to show you by having some leaves in front of the lens first and then moving to the left. I personally think that this looks really cinematic, and I can only recommend this technique for you, that you have something in front of your lens which then creates depth, which creates a foreground and then what you're actually trying to show. Or maybe even the best case scenario would be object in front, subject, and then blurry background. That'll look really cool, but I couldn't do that in that situation. So tip number 7 would be to color grade your footage. To some people this might sound rather obvious because they've been doing this all the time, but sometimes I still see people who actually post their videos just perfectly cut and nice editing, but in this flat, desaturated, low contrast look. I mean, maybe some people like it, but this just looks to me as if you had been filming in a flat profile and then were too lazy to actually color grade it. Especially important for me personally is contrast. I just need that contrast. It needs to punch a little, the footage, otherwise it just doesn't, I don't know, it's boring otherwise. But of course, maybe some people just like that flat look in their video. But anyway, what I'm just trying to say here is that consider color grading your footage and it'll look beast. So, step number 8 is shoot at the right time of day. This is, in my personal opinion, the most important step to get cinematic and really cool looking footage. I always rediscover for myself again that how unbelievably cool golden hour actually looks. It's just so beautiful. I always forget this myself. I've been shooting in the middle of the day, maybe with the clouds, which looks rather cinematic, but then I rediscover that golden look of golden hour at sunrise or sunset looks so good. If you look at this footage, the colors, they wouldn't be possible at noon. I shot this at 5 or 6 a.m. sometime around then when the sun was rising here, and whoa, those colors look so much better than if I had shot that 3 hours later. So really, I often forget this myself, and it's much more crucial than, for example, following the 180 shutter rule, because I don't follow it that much myself anyway. I try to follow it but often forget it. But anyway, trying to shoot a golden hour as much as possible if you're trying to make a cinematic travel video, for example. This looks so good. So step number 9, which is actually almost as crucial as golden hour, is that you actually expose correctly. I still see this, and I still do this myself, that sometimes footage looks like this instead of looking like this, and you can see the great difference that overexposing footage just looks so ugly. And underexposing is alright, like sometimes it even looks cool in my opinion, but definitely try not to overexpose your footage and just take your time when exposing your shot. Step 10 is, I have to admit, a tip I don't really like myself, because I just can't accept that we subconsciously react like this to this step, and that is to add cinematic bars at the top and the bottom. I don't know why, but for some reason this looks more cinematic. I can't really accept it myself because I think it's just such a strange, stupid tip, and it's actually cutting off information, except you have a anamorphic lens, which I don't, so I'm cutting off my information when I do that. That's why I very rarely do it. But yeah, I gotta admit, it just, for some reason, we were subconsciously conditioned to think that this looks more cinematic, and it somehow works. Like, if I look at this footage with cinematic bars, it really looks more cinematic, and I don't understand it. But yeah, let's get to the last step. So the last step I could think of today is that you export your video at 24 frames per second, because I personally think that a higher frame rate on YouTube especially, it looks really unnatural. I've seen videos in 50 or 60 frames per second and it looks quite strange, I have to admit. So I mean, I get it in sports. In sports you want to see that extra movement, but when you're just posting a cinematic video of whatever, B-roll and stuff, I think 24 frames just looks more natural. It just looks more cinematic. So I would recommend to you that you keep it at 24 frames per second. So that's pretty much it for me today. Those are the 11 steps that I could think of to improve your footage and make it look much more cinematic. And maybe I'll think of some more steps then a video will be following. That's it for today. So yeah, if you found any valuable information in this video, don't forget to leave a like, and if you want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.